Hello, my name is Daniel, and this is the Engineering Success Podcast, episode TBD. I'm not exactly sure when this episode will get published yet. There's going to be a little bit of time between me recording this and the episode getting posted, but I hope you guys are doing well. As of the time of recording this on November 11th, I just got back from Cancun supporting my lovely wife as she's presenting for a conference as part of her pursuit of her doctorate degree, and I'm very proud of her. We also took baby E out of the country for the first time, and turns out flying internationally with an infant is much different than flying domestically with an infant or with a child in general. So if you're doing that for the first time, definitely read into that. There are the things that are the normal things, like you can still have them as a lap infant, but different things is you can't check in online in advance, so you have to get to the airport really early. If you're flying internationally, you have to pay, with Americans, 10% of the ticket fee instead of having them as a free lap infant. That's different. And if you have a credit card that gives you a free check bag with American, you don't get the free check bag for international flights. So interesting factoids for you guys there. But yeah, life is good. I just had my first day at work back after the vacation, and got a lot of work piling up. But work is good, life is good. Lots of really exciting developments on my end. I'm playing piano in my church. That's really fun. I've gotten to help a couple of people through their career transitions, which has been really exciting. That's kind of my passion, and I'm really happy to have done that. But yeah, life is good. All right, before we get into the podcast, I have some shout outs to give out. Shout out to John Ott and Leroy Jenkins. Thank you so much for being top tier supporters of the podcast and for supporting the podcast. I really appreciate you guys. You guys help me keep my website running, www.engringsuccess.com, engineeringsuccess.com, where you can also contact me via email at daniel@engringsuccess.com if you want some advice, if you want to ask a question for me to answer on the podcast, if you want to sponsor the podcast, if you want to be a guest on the podcast, just contact me there at daniel@engringsuccess.com. But yeah, this episode is going to feature a wonderful interview with a guest that I honestly geeked out about a lot. I geeked out about her when I thought that she might be a guest on the podcast, and then I geeked out when I met her for the first time, and then I geeked out for an entire hour when we had our interview. So I hope you guys enjoyed this interview as much as I enjoyed being part of it. And without any further ado, I'll kick it over to the interview. My guest on today's podcast is an accomplished mechanical engineer, entrepreneur, and advocate for women in STEM. And I've spent the last few weeks anxiously anticipating this exciting interview. Sue Wong is a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where she studied mechanical engineering. After graduating, she spent time working on circuit assemblies for the International Space Station, yes, that International Space Station, before transitioning to the telecommunications industry as an engineer with Motorola. Her career then transitioned into entrepreneurship when she created her own modern baby changing table that was featured internationally in The Today Show. Man, as a new dad, that is something that I really appreciated. This is just the tip of the iceberg for Sue, and I'm so excited to have a career journey interview with Sue so we can learn more about how she found her way to her current role as a mechanical engineer at ASM, one of the world's leading companies in the ever critical and growing semiconductor industry. Sue is an absolutely wonderful advocate for women in STEM. In fact, she just spoke at the SWE conference. We're just coming off of that, so I'm excited to talk to her about that as well. And I'm so grateful that she's made herself available to share her more than 20 years of experience in industry on this podcast. I'm so honored to be speaking with you, Sue. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. This is so fun. How has your week been?
My week has been really good. Just got back from Chicago, so getting back into my normal routine in the office, catching
Yeah.
up.
Was that so Chicago? That's where the Wafer was, right? You just got back from that.
It was last week, so just got back.
How was that? How was the Sweet Fair? What's
Um,
your initial impression?
yeah, so this was actually my first time there.
Uh-huh.
And boy, there was so many women. It was great to see. I usually feel like I'm in the minority as a woman at work or in the office, but there was so many women. I think they said they had 18,000 women in attendance this year.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
it was
18,000.
huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what did you think of the career fair kind of exhibition hall setup that they have there? Would you recommend that
Oh,
the engineering students go to that career fair?
absolutely. There was
Yeah.
so many companies there, and yeah, there was so many young women engineers that were networking, meeting people from all different tech companies, and they had some impressive booths. So it was just like everybody in technology was there, and all the job opportunities were all in one spot. So I would highly recommend it.
That's awesome. Well, hey, speaking of young engineers, you had your start in engineering at some point. How did you discover your passion for engineering?
Um, well, as you mentioned, I did my undergrad at MIT.
Yep.
It wasn't, I didn't know that I wanted to be an engineer when I was younger, but I was always good at like numbers and math. So I had gotten accepted and I said, wow, what a tremendous opportunity. So I just went for it. I originally started thinking I would study architecture. And so I did a year of that. But then during that year, I was just gravitating towards the technical courses. And so it was like classes like energy and buildings, structures, those kind of classes that I really enjoyed. And so I kind of shifted into engineering my second year.
That makes sense. So, how was the process for you whenever you were applying to MIT? Was it obviously it was really rigorous, but I guess what was the moment that you realized, yeah, I think I could get into MIT, and then what was it like whenever you actually got in?
Yeah, I didn't know back then it was a much different process. Like you actually had paper applications and you didn't have all these stats on the website. So I had actually just received a brochure in the mail. And and then I thought, wow, I should just go ahead and apply. So I just filled out my application. I honestly I didn't know what my chances were at that time. And I was applying to a lot of different schools, so I just went for it and I surprisingly got that acceptance letter. And so, yeah, I thought I can't let this opportunity go. I just have to give it a shot and see
Yeah,
what it's like.
because you grew up in Arizona, right? So
I
that
did.
was probably a. I mean, was that nerve wracking moving basically entirely across the country for college?
Yeah. I mean, I was born and raised in Arizona. And so I had never lived in another state. And yeah, Arizona is just a bit of a smaller town than Boston. So moving to the East Coast was quite an adventure for me. And and so yeah, it was good. It was good for me to experience life. And like people came from all over the world. And
Hmm.
so it was really a great opportunity for me to just meet other students. And Boston, of course, has so many different universities all in the same area. So it's just so many students from everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's
How
definitely a fun place.
was it a pretty good transition for you than making that transition to living in Boston, or was it kind of tough at first?
I think there's always an adjustment period, but
Yeah.
they take good care of their freshmen, meaning everybody has housing. It's a small class, so it's 1,000 incoming freshmen at any given year. So, and there's these living groups. And so you can kind of go, they had at that time something they called Rush Week, where everybody could kind of find their dormitory or their, fraternity housing. And so you just have a week where you just go visit and you can find which one suits you the best. And so then you can select that and then you just get settled in. So because there's such a small community of students and they give you this opportunity to kind of see, okay, what kind of dormitory do I like? Or, and each one had its personality. And so you could find which one suited you best and just kind of settle in there. So, and everybody lives and breathes on campus. And so you
Yeah.
really get to know people quickly.
Uh,
So, although there's always this transition period, where you're just trying to meet friends, trying to, adapt to your classes and going into a new environment with totally different weather, all things like that. But I think for the most part, yeah, the MIT does a good job of just making sure everybody kind of finds their spot. You don't get lost because
yeah.
there's so few students. There's always somebody looking out after you.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I'd expect that from a school of MIT's caliber. So that's good to know that they do that. So for you personally, we talked a little bit about your transition, I guess, from a personal side. How about the academic side? You obviously were a phenomenal student coming out of high school to have been admitted to MIT. So I assume that, but did that translate directly to MIT? Were you also like immediately top of the class? Or was there kind of a learning curve for the rigor of college for you?
Oh, I think there was definitely a learning curve for sure. I mean, I think, coming from a small town, I could easily keep up with my academics and it
Hmm.
came pretty naturally to me. But then all of a sudden you're placed in an environment where you're with the top students at every college
Hmm.
nationwide and worldwide. And so now the level of who you're studying with has suddenly gone up tremendously. I would say that first year was definitely challenging,
Hmm.
and I realized, wow, there's so many incredibly smart people. So yeah, the classes were much faster paced. I found myself in a position where I was having to go in for extra office hours just to keep up with the pace of how quickly they covered material. But you have to get into that rhythm and that routine. Yeah, so definitely a transition.
Yeah. And then after the first year, did you feel like you were kind of everybody was on the same level playing field after that?
Yes, yes. Yeah, for sure. I think there was kids that got some incredible education in high school that I
Hmm.
feel like maybe I didn't get growing up. But yeah, I think it was about the sophomore year where I felt like as you started getting into your majors and the content was brand new to everybody or the curriculum was brand new to everybody,
Hmm.
that I realized, okay, now we're all on the level playing field, and yeah, was it was fine.
Yeah. So speaking of those classes, are there any classes that I guess still resonate with you today, either in what you do or just were your most memorable favorite class that you took?
Let's see. I think one of the classes that first got my interest in engineering was actually my energy and buildings, and that was
Oh.
when I was still in the architecture department. And so I had this opportunity to do a project where I traveled to a community college and we walked around and we were going to analyze, how efficient are all of these buildings at this community college? Where is all the energy losses coming? How do we, at what areas do we emphasize to invest money to make it a more energy efficient campus? And so I saw the practicality of engineering and the application of it really early on, which I think was very appealing to me. So it wasn't as theoretical, but I could see the impact of what engineering decisions can make on the community and in, things like schools, etc. So that class in particular was something I enjoyed. And then another class that I really liked was towards my senior year, and that was our design classes.
Yeah.
And so, we had various designs. Let's see. I think ours was actually had to do with it had to do with mounting a horse for like a paraplegic, like if a paraplegic wanted to go horseback riding. And so we had to like design a structure that would allow somebody that doesn't have use of their legs to be able to mount a horse. And so we
Wow.
just got teamed up into teams of three, and we just had to, design it, analyze it. Yeah, we didn't actually test that one out.
No, no,
But
that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me. One of my senior design projects was designing a system to allow a one-armed person to operate a chainsaw. And I was like, okay, legitimate potential scenario, but regardless of whether or not it being a legitimate scenario, do we really want to trust a bunch of college students' design with a one-armed person's trying to operate a chainsaw? It's
That's
fun though, the
very
scenarios that they
similar.
give us in engineering school, right? Yeah, it's fun how they give us those scenarios and like, hey, what if I mean, but that's cool though. Engineering is about making life more accessible for everybody, down to like ADA codes, right? So that's really
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. Oh my
And
goodness.
then
It's funny the
and one other
parallels.
one other thing that was very striking in my undergrad was the 270 contest. And that was pretty famous back in the day for, the robot competitions. And so, yeah, we did, and they have these competitions all over the place now, accessible to so many kids. But yeah, this was one of the big events at MIT every year. And it's like being in a sports competition, all the lights and the cameras, and
Oh.
everybody's watching your robot. I did not do that well in the competition,
Is that like
but
the
it was
battle
still
bots?
fun. Yeah, yeah,
Oh wow.
yeah.
You participated in that? Are there any videos online of your robot getting absolutely
Oh.
mauled?
um, no, I don't think I've seen any videos because this was, gosh, back in the 80s. I'm sure they were taking videos at the time, but there wasn't like YouTube like it is today. But yeah, my
Right.
my machine did not do well. And curiously enough, like almost every year when I was there, it was never a mechanical engineer that won that competition. It was always like somebody from the physics department or somebody else just
Yeah.
taking that course for fun.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody that was just so passionate about it that they were taking it because they really wanted to come in and break some stuff. That's so good.
Yeah.
That's so good. So speaking of which, I guess you weren't on the BattleBots team, but were you involved in any other clubs while you were in school? Or
I just did like fun um, clubs like the Asian Students Club. We played volleyball. I was involved with like just recreational volleyball teams. I was part of a sorority, Alpha Chi Omega.
okay,
So those
awesome.
are kind of the activities that I had been involved with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And would you say that being involved in a Panhellenic sorority like Alpha Chi Omega, that would you say that that's compatible with pursuing an engineering degree? I feel like some people think that you can't get an engineering degree and do Greek life, but as somebody that also was involved in Greek life, I disagree with that sentiment.
Yeah, I only know Greek life at MIT, and I don't know how representative that
Uh
is
huh.
of other Greek life. But, and we didn't have a house at that time. So I was living in the dorm and we would just meet regularly. I would say some of my best friends that I'm still in touch with today are who I met through that sorority.
Hmm.
So it was just a great, like, shared experience that we had, even though we weren't living together. I
Yeah.
think now, if you go there today, I think there are many more houses that the
Hmm.
sororities have. And so that probably becomes an even more, I don't know, a different experience for people
Yeah.
that live in the home. Did you live in a fraternity house when you were in
I
undergrad?
I did. I did lived it. So my university, it's like a 3 year on campus requirement. So then every year the seniors would rent a normal house in a normal neighborhood, and then we would be the best attempt at being neighbors that we could be. But yeah, we lived in a regular old. Our fraternity house was just a 2,000 square foot house in a normal neighborhood. But yeah, I did live in a frat
Gotcha.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Living in the house with all the events that roll through the house, it is definitely a distracting experience for sure. Especially, yeah, yeah. So I understand that. But in addition to your involvements in your clubs, you also had an internship while you were in college, right? So how did that
Yeah.
process come together for you?
Oh gosh, that was a while back. I think I had applied to companies in Phoenix because that was my hometown, and I always
Yeah.
liked just going back home for the summer. And so I honestly, gosh, I can't remember how I found out about that opportunity, but I must have just been looking for summer internships, and I applied to several places, interviewed with Honeywell Satellite Systems, and they gave me an internship. I think that was probably after my junior year.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, yeah, I don't think I knew anybody. I just, maybe I checked out their web. No, they probably didn't even have a website. I don't even know how I found out about it back then. Maybe they just had like, we used to have like cork boards in the hallway. I mean, that was
Oh my
honestly
goodness.
how, like, this was life in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, right? Or yeah, so job postings were a
Physical.
lot of paper back then.
Yeah. But then it translated into the cool thing about doing the internship, like that you said after your junior year, is it sounds like you probably already had a job offer lined up pretty soon into your senior year, and you then started working for them after you graduated. Is that correct?
Right. So I think that internship led to my first full-time job. So you're right. I did an internship my junior year, and then when I graduated, they offered me a full-time position.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was pretty nice.
Yeah. So let's talk about your entry level time at Honeywell. What you got to work on the International Space Station. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, that was my first project. So at
Your first
Honeywell,
project? That's
yeah.
so cool. Sorry, I told myself I wouldn't do this, but I'm just going to spend the entire interview geeking out over the different things that you've done. All
No
right, carry on.
worries.
Tell me more about what you did for the International Space Station.
Yeah, so we designed what is called multiplexer demultiplexers. So if there was any communication on the International Space Station that went from one area to another,
Hmm.
these electronic boxes would transfer that data from one location to another. And so it was the design of these black boxes with all of the electronics inside of it. And so a lot of my first projects were involved with thermal simulation of the cooling of those electronics. How do they get cooled? Also just electronic packaging. So how do you make the connections between these PCBs inside this box? And then how do you make the connections between one electronic box to another? So a lot of cabling. And then also another part of the job was vibration analysis.
Hmm.
So all of little the surface mount leads, we analyzed every one of them because if you're sending it out to space, you want to make sure that every connection uh, is is robust enough to withstand the launch, etc. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it was a bunch of thermal design, a bunch of vibration analysis, and electronic packaging. So, yeah, it was exciting to learn about that.
That's really cool. Yeah, I feel like, every electrical system needs that mechanical side to it, and that's what you were doing. What'd you learn about yourself? And because you interned for them for a summer, and then you spent the first 3 years of your career there. What'd you learn about yourself, about what you liked and what you were interested in your career from your time at Honeywell?
Well, I think I was just getting my feet wet in
Yeah,
the industry and just adjusting because that adjustment from college life to your first job
yeah,
is quite a transition, right?
yeah.
And so just learning the processes and the procedures and getting to know just an organization in general,
Hmm.
like what the roles of all the different people were and who the people were, and just establishing just a friend group, like people you
Yeah.
hang out and have lunch with every day, um, and also who to ask questions with, like who do
Hmm.
you go to when you need when you have questions about certain aspects of your design. So I think just learning about the organization
Hmm.
and learning and meeting people and establishing relationships. I think that was, and that's with any job, not just your first job, but anywhere you go, just being able to establish the relationships is probably one of the most key, not just knowing your technical knowledge, but knowing how to meet all the people that you need to know to get your job done.
Yeah, like how to be a professional, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so you learned how to be a professional at Honeywell, and then you went to Motorola after a few years there. What was the
hmm
opportunity that you had that sent you over to Motorola?
Yeah, so one of my coworkers at Honeywell had moved over. And so there was a similar position for a mechanical engineer in that knew about electronic packaging. And so he called me up and said, "Hey, we have this really great opportunity. You might be a good fit. Why don't you apply?" And so I ended up applying to Motorola, and they made me an offer. And also, ironically, my husband worked there at the time too, and he's also a mechanical engineer. But he was not the one that referred me to that job.
Was he your husband yet?
What's that?
Was he already your
No, we were
husband?
not married at that time. We
Oh,
were
okay.
dating. And so we were like, oh, is that, is that going to be good if we work at the same place? We didn't know.
Yeah.
But then we just decided, okay, let me give it a shot. And yeah, I was glad I moved over. It was a good change.
Yeah, I mean, you stayed in that group with Motorola for 8 years, and then you took a career break whenever your kids were born, and then you came back to that same group of people, I believe, that same
That's
team
right.
after they had been acquired. I mean, you spent pretty much the majority of your career working with that team. I think 20 plus years of your career. So obviously, it was a wonderful fit. What about that work and the people that you were working with made you want to stay with that group of people for so long and doing what you were doing for as long as you did?
Um, Gosh, yeah, that's a great question. I just enjoy, like, there was just a sense of belonging
Hmm.
there, even though the company had changed and it got sold off actually probably three times during the course of my stay. But the people, there was just such a great sense of community at that job that I think kept me. So definitely the people was what kept me around. But the job itself, there was a variety, even though it was a similar technology, but there was a variety of applications that just always kept it interesting. So we started out in telecommunications, and then we started, selling our embedded electronics into like the rail industry, and then we got into some commercial off-the-shelf military applications. So the challenges of designing embedded computing for all these different industries it kept it interesting and never a dull moment. So I enjoyed
Yeah,
that part of it too.
that makes sense. That's a good reason to stay. And sounds like you also had pretty good career growth and progression as well, which also is another good reason to stay. You even pushed that career growth yourself by getting an MBA, if I'm looking at my notes correctly. Why'd you get an MBA while you were there? And what did it end up doing for you?
Yeah, so back at that time, I was at Motorola,
Yeah.
and they offered it as a great benefit. They paid 100% of tuition for any
Wow.
advanced degrees. Like my husband, as I had mentioned, he was also there. He had gotten his master's in engineering and in mechanical engineering while he was at Motorola. And so I was just young. I had the time, I had the energy, but I didn't have any business background. So I
Yeah.
didn't take a single business class in my undergrad. And I've always kind of had an interest, and I thought it would be a great opportunity just to get the basics of accounting, finance, marketing, just the basics of business. ASU was right around the corner from my office. So it was like a 15-minute drive, and they had a program that was just under 2 years.
Wow.
So I guess what made it, so appealing was I was young and I had the energy. I location wise, it was very close to where I was at, and three, my company was willing to pay for it. So yeah, why not? It's good. I would go to the office, and then I'd take classes in the evenings, 2 nights a week, for just under a couple of years. But yeah, it was good.
Yeah. And where did you get your value out of that? Did it come in the form of like promotions that you wouldn't have gotten without MBA behind your name, or was it more from like the knowledge and stuff that you gained from it? Where'd you get the value from your MBA?
Yeah, I think it's just my own understanding of organizations. I actually I've loved design. So I've
Yeah,
always wanted to stay in the design side of engineering.
yeah,
I didn't really ever have ambitions to take the management track. And in fact, that doesn't actually suit my personality that well.
yeah.
But it has helped me understand, like, there's so many decisions that do get made in terms of engineering design that
Hmm.
affect so many aspects of engineering. So so I think that's where I find the most value, in that I can associate what I do as a design engineer to how that affects finance, like in terms of how much our products cost or how much the parts that we're designing cost. And then, there's just all these associations to all these other parts of the organization that, because I've kind of studied it in the MBA, then I know, like, the impact of what I do and how that affects everybody else.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, you started out as an individual contributor as a design engineer with Motorola. Then you kind of grew eventually into a mechanical engineering manager where you managed a team of multiple engineers. Did you get to kind of carry some of those lessons into that as well?
Um, sure. Yeah, that was a brief, like, time, I guess, right before I had my kids.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, there was just a handful of people that I managed at Motorola. But yeah,
yeah,
that was definitely helpful.
yeah. You mentioned the kids. So, okay, you have a kid and then you take a career break and then again, this is where I geek out. I guess you needed to do some engineering, so you created your own diaper changing table company, and you take it to the point that you have like manufacturing set up. You're doing press tours. You're on the Today Show. Okay, how did that even become a thing? And why'd you do this while you were while you were on your maternity leave?
Yeah, it's hard to really pinpoint the evolution of it, but what does stick out in my mind was my second son was an extremely active toddler.
Yeah.
And it was really, like, even more so than my first son, he was just a wiggly guy, never wanting to stand still. And yeah, changing his diaper was really, it was just challenging because he just didn't, I couldn't even get him on his back for a second to get that diaper on. So you mentioned you have kids. Do you have?
Yeah, I have a 16-month-old, and yeah, we're at the stage
Ah,
of diaper changes being a slight challenge. We've had to move to the cruisers where we can just shove them on each one of her legs and then pull them up because there's no stability to do the pull it over. Yeah,
yes, understood, understood. Yeah, so I was just talking to my husband and I said, "Oh my gosh, I need a diaper that's already laid out, like
yeah,
already ready for him to change." And um and then when I'm done changing him, I want it automatically ready for the next one. So I did kind of described it to my husband, and he was just like, "Well, why don't you just build one?" And so, yeah, so my first prototype, and I should show you a picture, but my first prototype was like literally cardboard. I cut it out of cardboard, and I had this dispenser that stored all the fresh diapers underneath, and it was spring loaded so that, and I had Velcro on the top. So you could just have that diaper just laying out flat, and I could change his diaper in just like seconds. And so just that
efficiency.
cardboard prototype I used for like a long time. And I'm like, "Henry, this is so, like, I love using this cardboard changing table." And he's like, "Well, why don't you just see if you could take it a step further and just, make it out of, like, find out what you want to make it out of." So in my head, I just thought of bent wood, some nice fabrics, and we found a manufacturer that could build it. And I had a lot of CAD skills at that time, and I knew how to do drawings. And so all of those skills that I developed at on the space station. And Motorola came in handy, so I was able to whip up some drawings really quick, find a supplier, and yeah, I had them built. And so then, yeah, I just found some trade shows, and then I took my first like 12 prototypes to LA. And there was a baby trade show, and there seemed to be enough interest at that. And so I just started taking orders for it, and I got into some of those bougie like baby stores in LA, and so it just kind of took off from there.
That's so cool. And then, I mean, you did it for a long time. What was the when did that sunset?
Yeah, so it probably, yeah, so I did it for about 3 years.
Yeah.
Um and and it kind of sunsetted when my son was potty trained and then when I went back to work.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't consider it enough that I could like make a career out of it. I see it as just like a side business that's kind of like a hobby, like
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know, like what people do on Etsy today, right? Or no, well,
Yeah.
people probably make really great livings off of Etsy, but just this was at a relatively small scale. So yeah, when Nikki went back to school, I just decided to kind of just sell my last table, and then I just transitioned back into more traditional engineering role.
Yeah. Let's talk about that transition because that's something that's really relevant, I think, for women in engineering is that transition back to the workplace. How was it
Yeah.
for you? I know you went back to the same people that you had worked with. And I think that it was a
Mhm.
different company at that point in time, but you went back to the same team. How was that transition for you going back into the workforce?
Yeah, so it was relatively smooth just because I was familiar with the people, the process, the office. When I did quit, and well, so when my first son was born, I had gone part time at
Hmm.
Motorola. My manager allowed me to go part time, and then when my younger son Nicky was born, I decided to stay home altogether, and I was at home for 5 years. And then when my younger son entered into kindergarten, I had gotten a call back from my former employer. And they said, look, we have a position open. Would you consider coming back to work full time? So the timing just happened to be perfect because my
Hmm.
younger son was going into school at that time. But when I had first made that decision to stay at home, I did not have a plan. Like I didn't know when or if I was going to go back into the workforce. I didn't know what that was going to look like. And I had just, decided I was going to stay at home. So the opportunity kind of fell in my lap. And I just ended up, deciding, okay, well, it would be a good time now that my son was going to be in school to go back to the office. So the transition, going back, it always takes me, I would say, 6 months to a year to find that rhythm
Hmm.
because there's just a rhythm of life. And so
Yeah.
going back full time is can be stressful because everything that you did when you're at home full time now still has to get done. But now you have a full time job on top of that. So I think there's always a transition period where, you're just trying to make that balance or find a comfortable balance getting your work done and keeping up with your projects at work, and then also managing all of the things at home as well. So, yeah, but it always takes me about at least 6 months to a year to really get that rhythm and that pace down.
Yeah. And you did it. You did it. You made the transition and then you spent I guess another 12 years with them after you came back, which that's a really long run. That's again 20 total years with the same company. And you did a good job of explaining all the different types of projects you worked on. So I won't grill you any harder on that. Let's talk about what you do now because 3 years ago you joined ASM. How has that shift been? And I know it's a different industry going from, I guess, the packaging that you were doing to semiconductors. How has that transition been for you?
It's been a fascinating one. Semiconductor is like no other industry that I've worked in because I've been in space, I've been in telecommunications, I've done, commercial off the shelf for the military and now and the baby industry and now semiconductor. Semiconductor is probably the fastest paced industry that I've been in so far, but it's also fascinating, not only in terms of the technology in semiconductor, but also the impact that it has, the political impact that it's had
Ah,
worldwide. So there's so much attention, with the CHIPS Act, there's so much money going into developing a lot of technology here in the US. And especially with AI and all the technology that goes into the hardware to support that, yeah, I've come to realize that, yeah, semiconductor is a very it's a critical technology for our country. So,
yeah.
and yes, and learning about that has been fascinating. So yeah.
So, what part of the life cycle of semiconductors are you involved in? Are you involved in like the early stage R&D, or like, I guess, the operational, like, I guess, manufacturing side? Like, what kind of
Yeah.
involvement do you have?
So ASM is a wafer equipment manufacturer. So we build the machines that build the chips.
Oh
And
wow.
so, yeah, all of our equipment, and we specialize in a process called deposition. And so our key technologies are called atomic layer deposition and epitaxy. And so our equipment is just one on the lines of these fabs that deposit material onto the wafer as it's going down the line.
Wow.
So we have engineers that, well, we have many business units all over the world, and each one specializes in a specific type of deposition processes. Yeah.
So what about the deposition process is crucial to manufacturing a semiconductor for those that are unaware, like myself?
Well, I think yeah, you hear about the size of the gates, right,
Yeah.
for semiconductors. So deposition is one of the processes that allows the gates to get to 2 nanometers and below. So you have to tightly control, like, the number of atoms that are applied to the
Holy moly.
wafer at any given time. And so there's so many different processes that go into just manufacturing a single chip. It's, yeah,
Hmm.
it's really amazing. So yeah,
Yeah.
so our processes use different gases, different materials. There's so much technology in terms of, well, I'm a mechanical, so I think of it in terms of thermal and flow. There's so much that goes into the technology to deposit that, like, atom level wafer layer.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. Yeah, it's so much more precise. I'm used. I deal in concrete and like hey, a yard,
Yeah.
much larger tolerances than that you're dealing with on your
Yeah,
end.
and we get to, like, there's fun things too with our equipment because we have robots that transfer the wafers in and out of our equipment. And
Yeah.
so when you can get that, like, it's really I'm so nerdy, but it's really a beautiful thing to just watch this robot grab these wafers and transfer them in
Yeah.
and out of our process modules, and watch the handoffs. And yeah, there's so much technology in terms of, vacuum chambers and gas delivery systems, and doors opening and closing and valves going on and off. There's just hundreds of these devices that all have
Yeah.
to work together in order to just apply that one layer of material to each wafer. So yeah, it's fascinating.
That's so cool. So, what does your day to day look like in your role as the senior engineer, specifically as senior mechanical engineer? And are you interfacing with a lot of third parties in what you do? Like, who do you interact with, and what does your day to day look like?
A lot of times my day will start with calls in India. We collaborate with a lot of engineers in India, And so they support us with, 3D modeling and drawings for our designs. And then I'll come into the office, and we have a team at ASM. There's probably close to 400 engineers at our site here. And my team in the platform group is probably around 20 some engineers. So we're teamed up and we work together on various designs. So we have a lab here in our office in Phoenix that is very busy place. There's people going in and out of these clean room labs all day long.
Mhm.
Um, and then in the evenings, we have calls with our teams, mostly in Japan for my team.
Wow.
We're really a global corporation. Yeah. And there's like daily collaboration with people in India and Japan, but ASM also has business units in, let's see, Milan, the Netherlands, and South Korea. And then our manufacturing happens in Singapore. So you are constantly interacting with, these amazing engineers at all of these locations. And sometimes, we had to have calls late at night, just because that's when certain people are available. But yeah, so it not only the most diverse company in terms of our, workforce, even here in Phoenix, but you really get so much interaction with people all over the world. And another fun thing about my job is I've gotten to travel a lot. So I had never been to Singapore or Malaysia, and I just got back from a trip to Tokyo. All ASM locations, and yeah, it's been a really great opportunity to see the world. And when you get an opportunity to meet face to face with people that only talk to on Zoom or on email, it's really a good opportunity.
Yeah. And what would necessitate a new design? What are you involved and your engineers involved in, I guess proposing the business cases for different designs, or is it, I guess, facility and like project specific? What causes a new design iteration from your team to start happening?
Yeah, I think it's mostly customer driven. And so
Okay.
we have a marketing team that interacts directly with our customers, and
Mhm.
they'll find out what they're looking for in their next generation of chips that they're building. And so it's that team that is customer facing that gathers all the requirements.
Mhm.
And then they'll decide, okay, I think we should design this product. And then once they define, what the next generation tool should look like, then they'll hand that over to engineering, or they'll probably have several discussions with, the top, VPs and directors of engineering. Okay, is this
Yeah.
what, can you do some feasibility studies? Is this even possible? What kind of materials would be best suited for this kind of deposition, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah. And then eventually it'll make its way down to the design teams. And then they'll
Yeah.
say, okay, this is our next design project. Um, and then we'll get
That's
started.
That's so cool. It's fun to hear because obviously I've never worked in semiconductor design, but when you describe the design life cycle process that you go through, it sounds similar to the kind of the life cycle that we go through in any engineering project. My background's in consulting, and it's the same thing. You do a feasibility study first, and then you go into detailed design. So it's kind of cool to see the parallels in our industries.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. What else do you like about your experiences at ASM? Do we miss anything?
Um, I think, every job that I work in any industry, it's always the people for
Yeah.
me. At ASM, we have so many people from so many different countries. And so it makes it so colorful. Like just even in our lunchroom, there's so many languages being spoken. And so you just get to learn about other people's cultures through their hobbies and the food, etc. You just get exposure to that. So that's a lot of fun. And it's also fun to see this next generation of engineers coming in and getting to see them mature and evolve and learn this technology. And so, yeah, we are growing. We have so many positions, and you're just meeting new people all the time. And there's so many engineering recs that are still we're still trying to fill now.
Yeah.
So it's a great place to be because, yeah, it's everything seems to be going in the upward direction.
So what cities are you hiring in the US?
Oh, so we have our main office is in Phoenix.
Okay.
And so that is where most of the jobs in the US are. But we also have field support at where all of our customers are located. So we also have engineers in like Portland. Gosh, I'm not really that great on knowing all the different US locations that
Yeah,
there
no
are,
worries.
but
Yeah.
Phoenix is the primary office.
Yeah. And what kind of engineering degrees do y'all hire?
So, with our engineering design, usually at least a master's. If you're in like process engineering, a lot of people in that area have their PhDs.
Okay.
Um, and so, yeah, engineering is usually at least a master's.
Yeah. And what kind of topic areas? Is it important? What kind of I guess would it be important that somebody's master's is specifically focused in semiconductors, or what kind of level of focus
No,
do people need to have?
well, like myself, I have a mechanical engineering background. So when it in the design level, there's mechanical, there's electrical, there's
Yeah.
a lot of software engineers as well because we
Oh
have to
wow.
have software. All of our devices operate together, and so we have a huge software engineering team. And then when it comes to process, those are like material science, probably chemical engineering as well. So a lot of different areas of specialty.
Cool. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'll definitely drop a link to ASM's website down in the description for those that find it interesting and a place that they might be interested in working at.
Oh,
I'm
thank
trying to
you.
think. I'm trying to think. What else have we not talked about? We talked briefly about what you speaking at SWE, but maybe we can close out by having you share a little bit more about what you talked about at SWE, and then
Yeah.
we'll close out.
Well, my talk was on career transitions, which
Oh
we've
yeah,
kind of went through all of my career transitions, but it was mostly just giving advice to women
yeah,
about, like sometimes it's difficult and there's a lot of uncertainty anytime you go on whenever you make a career change, right?
yeah,
And sometimes that can be stressful or it can, the uncertainty can be uncomfortable at times. But especially now at this stage in my career, I've 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 become familiar with the different seasons throughout a woman's life, um, meaning like before you had kids, and then while you're a mother, and now I'm an empty nester. So your career will also follow kind of these seasons of your own life. And so sometimes you can really pour yourself into your career, and then sometimes you have to maybe pull back a little bit when you want
yeah.
to spend more time with your family. So but that's okay because it's a season, and so just learning how to embrace those different seasons was what my sweet talk was about.
That's awesome, and it's so fun how you just got back from that, and now you get to talk about those transitions in detail on the podcast.
Yeah.
So I really thank you for sharing that and sharing your experience on the podcast and for giving your time. And I'm so excited to publish this and for people to listen to your story.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
Yeah, and it was fun for me. And I think that's everything. Thank you so much, Sue.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Sue Wong. If you enjoyed it, make sure to share it with somebody else you think would enjoy it. Please do consider supporting the podcast by either commenting, sharing, or even becoming a top tier supporter. You can do that via Patreon or via Spotify. The links are down in the description of the video or the audio podcast that you're watching or listening to. Also, make sure you subscribe on YouTube. It's free to you and it really helps me out. I'm closely approaching 900 subscribers, and my goal is reaching 1,000 to become eligible for monetization. So please do consider subscribing. All right, well, I'll catch you guys in the next episode of the Engineering Success Podcast. Thank you again so much for listening or watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.
I'm miscommunicating. I just made a pilot, then they threw me on the stations. Now I'm not complaining, My thoughts get complicated, I cannot explain in layman's. Never losing focus because I ain't chasing payments. Still playing in the basement while I'm working on arrangements. They heard the kid in 50 countries, thank God that's amazing. But I'd rather thank Spotify, they put me on the station.